I am confident we're going to do this. So thank you for coming today, and thank you for participating in the poll. Benji and I, our goal is to move that needle after the end of this workshop where you're feeling more confident. So 16% of you said, yep, I feel pretty good that I can write a successful grant, but 84% of you said no. At the end of this workshop, we would like more of you to be confident. So that's our goal today, right? And let me just preface this by saying we're going to cover a lot in a short amount of time. I've been doing this for over 3 decades, and I learn something new every time. And so, and Benji will tell you his story as well. I have written grants from as low as $500 to several hundred million. And I'm getting close to in the billions of acquiring funding accumulatively from, you know, my years of doing grants management and grant writing. But let me just say, this isn't all exhaustive, right? It's going to change. So this is just a primer to get you started. So take that with a grain of salt. We're going to cover a lot of information. So with that, let's get going. Welcome to grant writing, making your best case. Show me the money, because we're worth investing in. At the end of the day, that's what it's about, is letting people know that our proposal is worthy and you should invest in us. So we're going to help you get some guidance on how you can make your best case. So our agenda today, my menu's in the way, there we go, is talk a little bit about the solicitation type, because there's different types of grant proposals out there, evaluation and scoring, what it looks like to contract, who to contact with questions, timelines of grant processes. We're going to talk about the grant writing plan and cover those areas in there. And then we'll end with the budget. After each section, we will go through questions, but if we fall behind our schedule, we might wait for your questions to come at the end. So if you have a burning question and we haven't gotten to it, be sure to put it in the chat, because there will be an update after this meeting. You'll get some information, including the PDF of these slides and some other resources, and we'll hope to address some of your questions then, if at all possible. So let's get started. Okay, so solicitation type. A solicitation is a process to request information to determine qualified organizations and programs to award funding, resources, and or a contract of goods and services. So this could be a competitive process, right, for a solicitation. And there's different types of solicitations. There's the request for proposals. That's like the normal one for grants, is request for proposals. But you could have a request for applications where you have to apply, they review them, and then they score them, right? So you have to apply for the funding as opposed to submitting a proposal, right? So a proposal says, how do you propose to use the fund? The application says you're actually going to apply for it. They're actually a little bit different. And then request for qualifications. That's where you have to submit, hey, look, this is what makes me worthy of getting these funds, because we can do A, B, C, and D, and your funding wants us to do A, B, C, and D. So we're going to submit our qualifications, our expertise, our skill set to show that we are in alignment with the funding source that's out there. And then there's also, of course, request for information. In this way, what they're looking at, usually, for example, you might see that for where you're doing construction trades, kind of, they may say request for information, like, give me information. Do you know how to do drywall? If you're doing services, they might ask for a request of information. Can you do behavioral health support and do it with this different modalities, right? So that may be it. More about what kinds of things that you do that might be consistent with what we're trying to achieve with this particular solicitation type. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Benji for some of Benji's wisdom.
Thank you, Cynthia. So in addition to those, I'd see one that's kind of coming more and more popular right now, which are either NOFAs or NOFOs. So NOFAs are Notice of Funding Availability or Funding Available, and it's very similar to RFP processes or grant writing process, actually. Notice of Funding Opportunity is similar as well, but it's just slightly different language, so I thought I'd mention it. We'll go into more of the specifics about the ins and the outs of applying later in the presentation, but what I'll say about these RFP, RFA, RFQ, RFI, et cetera, is many times they will require you to join a portal. Like all of the Pierce counties go through their portal. Even private funders often have their own portal. So if you know that there's a funder that does regularly fund in the subject area, go ahead and join their portal so that you have access to that information, and pay attention to not just the questions that you have, but as you go into these RFPs, you'll be able to see the questions that other people submit through the portal, and so you can do some peer-to-peer learning.
Wonderful. Thank you, Benji. Okay, so what is a grant? Real quickly, I can't see you, so can you put in the chat, what is a grant? If you know, I just need a couple of you to put in there, what is a grant? I'm looking. Money opportunity. Okay, Malcolm. Opportunity for funding. An allotment of funding for a particular project. Okay. Funds for, okay, funding that does not need to be paid back. Good job, Jessica. You're getting some components of it. Wonderful. So let me tell you what a grant is. A grant. It's an amount of non-repayable money that a government or other institution gives to an individual or to an organization for a particular purpose, such as education or home improvements, behavioral health, mentoring, that kind of thing. So again, it's got 4 components. It's non-repayable money. It's given to you for particular, 3 areas. Non-repayable, it's given to you for a particular purpose, right? That's the main components of a grant. Now, let's just do a little caveat to that. Non-repayable, that means it's non-repayable if you achieve the results, if you achieve the results that the money was given for that particular purpose. So if you underachieve, there may have to be some type of repayment clause, but typically it's non-repayable, it's given to you for a particular purpose. So evaluation and scoring. This is really important. Any RFP, RFQ, RFI, any kind of NOFA or NOFO, I love that, NOFO. Mommy, can I have some more donuts? NOFO. So threshold criteria. There is, when you, an RFP is issued, there always is a section on how you're going to be evaluated. Like, how is the decision going to be made on who's going to be awarded funding? And so that's usually in the section on evaluation and scoring. There's usually a threshold criteria. In other words, you have to meet these minimum criteria in order to even qualify to submit an application. So sometimes that must mean you have a nonprofit status. Maybe you have to have been in business for a certain amount of time. Maybe you need to have had experience in providing this particular type of service that the grant is looking to achieve. Maybe if it's addressing food insecurities, you need to have been involved in that, and you know, running a food bank or addressing that. Maybe there's one in working in a rural community, so you need to be able to show that, but there's an eligibility, a threshold criteria. So the first thing you want to do is check out, hey, what's the threshold criteria? Do I meet it? Now, let me just tell you, with a nonprofit status, sometimes if you aren't a nonprofit and they realize that there's groups and communities and grassroots efforts out there who really do a great job of providing service, but they're not a nonprofit, they might say you can work with a fiduciary agent who is a nonprofit. And that is where, let's say we are the Bonnie Lake Community Food Group, but you're not a nonprofit. You might contract with someone else who is like the Puyallup Food Bank that maybe is a nonprofit. They would be your fiduciary agent to receive these grant monies so that Bonnie Lake folks can go out and do what they need to do with the funding. But it is Puyallup Food Bank that is holding the money and doing the reporting and handling the contract for that grant, right? So sometimes we'll look at having a fiduciary agent. So then there's the scoring criteria. That's how your proposal will be scored. And let me just tell you, out the gate, I'm always thinking about how am I submitting this proposal that gives me maximum points? So I'm thinking like I'm a reviewer, not like I'm a grant writer, but like I'm a reviewer of people's grants, right? If you think that way, you're already thinking about how can I score maximum points? So you want to look at how your proposal will be scored. And there's 3 key areas. There's the criteria, there's the indicators, which are parameters that address whether it's a strong, okay, or weak response. And then there's your score. So in other words, maybe one of the criteria might be staff experience. And then, so that's the criteria. Then another one might be the indicators, right? We've done this. You might have staff that have been in nonprofits for 30 years, but they might only have 3 to 4 years experience in delivering services in a food bank environment, right? So the criteria is staff experience. When you look at your staff, maybe they only have 3 years experience. And so what does that score mean, right? So 3 key areas when you're looking at scoring. There's the criteria, there's the indicator, and then there's the actual score. An example of criteria could be equity, right? Want to have equity as opposed to equality, which is different. Social justice, the program need, the program goals and activities, your organizational capacity, whether or not you have partnerships, and then the soundness of your budget, right? These are examples of criteria. It's important to understand the criteria. So I just mentioned a bunch: equity, social justice, program need, but how are those defined? You really need to know how each of those criteria are defined and how they're measured to maximize your score. So again, that goes back to those key areas. For criteria, it could be equity. The indicators might be how well your organization reflects the community that you're serving and have been there to support them, right? And then the score would be based on how well you do that. Okay, so it's so in the review process, there's usually a team or a panel, right, or some staff that will look at how well you respond to those questions and meet that criteria, and they'll score you. So if you come into the process thinking about how well I can write this to maximize the score, right? Understand the criteria, the indicators, then I can maximize my score. So think, oops, hold on. I went too fast. There we go. So again, to maximize your score, think like a reviewer. Would this response give maximum points? Make sure you fully understand the criteria and the indicators and write your application to address that criteria. And in the budget, the budget should reflect your proposal. Be careful of the maximum budget line items and ineligible expenses. So in your budget, 2 key things to remember is that if you are applying for a food bank, but the majority of your funding is going towards mental health services, right? That's not in alignment with the need of the program. Or if your proposal is you want to provide mental health services to a certain population, but the majority of your funds is paying staff who do government relations work and advocacy work for your organization, but they don't do direct client services and mental health support, then your budget does not really reflect the proposal, right? And then understand minimums and maximums. So they might say only 50% of your funding can go to staff costs, or maybe 5% of your total budget request can go towards administrative costs, like for accounting and legal fees, right? understand those maximum and minimum so that you don't go over those, right? And that you stay within them. And then we often encourage funders to allow videos and testimonials, right? So in lieu of an application, a written application, or with a written application, right? This helps address some of those barriers that we might have with language, and really understanding that some of our processes are kind of rooted in some systemic oppressive areas. And so allowing people to be able to express themselves in different ways to apply for funding is really important. So videos and testimonials, they should follow the same criteria as this, right? Make sure that you understand what the scoring is, address it well in your video and your testimonials. Benji.
All right. Sometimes in the RFP, RFQ process, the scoring criteria can be really transparent. And sometimes in private foundations or private fundraising, it's a little bit more obscure. So the 3 rules of grant writing that I like to tell people, especially for these private foundations, is read the guidelines. Rule number 1. Rule number 2, read the guidelines. And rule number 3, you guessed it, read the guidelines. So you have to kind of look for the Easter eggs that they're giving you in the language around what they tell you is important to them. Believe them, right? Don't try to convince them that what you're asking is the wrong question. This is much more important, actually. They know what they want. They know what they want to fund. So you answer their questions clearly and directly. The other thing I would say about this is, if you want to score the maximum points in this game, if you think about it like an Easter egg hunt, this is going to be the easiest Easter egg hunt you've ever put together. The Easter eggs should be the size of basketballs, and anybody should be able to see them on the field out there, right? You want to be clear, you want to be concise, you want to use their language so that they don't have to search for where you're answering their question. And I'm a good Southern Baptist from back in the day, born and raised in Alabama, right? And so I believe in catechism. And so for me, what grant writing catechism looks like is, if the question is, what's the mission of your organization? The answer should be, the mission of this organization is ... It shouldn't be, we started in 1908 and there's 80 years of history, and at some point you might get around to burying the mission statement. It's a clear, concise answer. And as on their side of things, as somebody looking at lots and lots of similar applications, the fact that you can be clear and concise and direct about answering the questions is going to put you in good stead with the program managers.
Thank you so much, Benji. Appreciate that. Okay, so we've covered 2 sections. Does anyone have any questions about the 2 things that we've covered, or the 3 things that we've covered thus far? Renee put in the chat, is there a criteria chart or a reference chart to ensure we are following the scoring criteria properly? Excellent question, Renee. So let me just say this. In the notice of funds available, or in the information regarding the particular grant, they have to disclose what the review and criteria is. So usually there's a grid or some type of chart that says, here's our criteria, here's the definition for it, and here's the scoring range. So that's what you want to look at, is in the proposal, whether it's a request for information, in the notice of funds available or notice of funds opportunity, however you get the information about that particular grant opportunity, look through that, and there should be the evaluation and scoring information. If it's not there, there's always someone listed as a contact. You should contact them immediately and find out what it is. Now, sometimes there's just a 1 or 2 page information sheet that goes out in a huge email, and it says, go to this website for additional information. When you go there, then you want to be able to look for the criteria. Excellent question. And also, if you ever have a question about the criteria and you're not sure, always call the contact on there to get some clarity so that you know how your proposal is really going to be evaluated. Okay, sorry about that. Matter of fact, let me just turn this off real quick so this doesn't happen. Sorry, y'all. I work for a hospital, and people seem to not understand do not disturb. That's
Good
okay.
question, Sally. I'll take this one. So I would suggest that you do not avoid for opportunities, you do not apply rather for opportunities that you don't meet the criteria. The reality is that funders generally will get so many applications that they're looking to weed out proposals. And so if you see like eligibility quizzes and so forth to see if you qualify from the beginning, don't try to shoehorn yourself in there. If you're not a fit, you're going to get weeded out eventually. The difference is they'll kind of resent it if you take them too far in the process and you don't qualify. So there's plenty of fish in the sea. It's a little bit like dating. It's not always easy to find the right fit for your organization, but I believe that it's not about changing yourself to be something for somebody else. It's about finding the fit for you.
Excellent advice. And that is so true. And the other thing I would tell you is not all money is good money. And what do I mean by that? If the requirements for reporting and all of the documentation and things that you have to do in order to as you go through the implementation of your project, if you were awarded this funding, exceeds your ability and your capacity, it may not be worth it, right? Because the last thing you want to do is be subject to all of those requirements. So you really got to look at, is this a good fit? Right? Not just in terms of our mission and in terms of meeting the criteria, but also in our ability to meet the requirements as we implement this. Okay, so again, I'm glad this is a great segue. Contracting, understanding the requirements. So in the notice of funding available or availability, or in the RFP, the request for proposal guidelines, they're going to say what are the contracting requirements. In other words, what will you be held accountable for if you are awarded these funds? Because you will have a contract and have to do certain things. So the contracting requirements include the contract term, the start and end date. So let's be clear. If you apply for something now, but the funds don't become available till January 1 of 2025, you need to know that, especially if you were looking for funding right now within the next 4 months. That may not be the right fund source for you. You want to look at the payment terms. Is it monthly? Is it quarterly? Is it based on a reimbursement? Is there an advance, right? All of these things are really, really important. Because if it's on a reimbursement, then you have to think, do I have enough to pay my staff? So what do we mean by reimbursement? Let's say you have a grant right now, but the way it works is at the beginning of the month, you submit an invoice for all of your eligible expenses for that grant for the work you did for the previous month, right? So here we are in January. You would be submitting a grant, an invoice to be reimbursed for all of your expenses for December, for whatever that program was that was grant funded. Do you have enough money to have paid and met your obligations for December already in the bank, right? Because if not, then you're waiting around. How did you meet your payroll, right? If payroll and paying staff was one of those things. So you need to think about those things. Maybe you'll need to ask for an advance so that you have a couple of months already covered so that you can pay your staff while you're on this reimbursement piece, right? Does that make sense to people? So again, you want to know what the payment terms are. You want to know what the reporting requirements are. How do you invoice? What kind of performance information do they need? Do they need a narrative every month? What does that look like? Is there certain data that you're supposed to collect? You want to know who the contracting entity is. So for example, if you're a grassroots organization and you're working with the fiduciary agent, your fiduciary agent is actually doing the contract with the funder, not your grassroots organization. Your grassroots organization is carrying out the program, but is the fiduciary agent who is doing the reporting. You want to know if you're doing a collaboration. So let's say Bonnie Lake gets together with Sumner, and they come in with a collaboration, a collaborative agreement, but there has to be a lead. So let's say Sumner says, I got this, I'll be the lead. It's still a partnership between Sumner and Bonnie Lake, but it is Sumner that's the lead and will be responsible for being the contracting entity for the partnership, okay? Understand memorandum of agreements and MOUs, which is memorandum of understanding. You can have partnership agreements. You can have a fiduciary agent agreement. So let's go back to this example with Sumner and Bonnie Lake. Let's say Sumner and Bonnie Lake have a memorandum of agreement of what they're going to do. Sumner is going to provide the transportation for the food services, and they're also going to coordinate the pickup from the food bank in Bonnie Lake and deliver it to residents in Bonnie Lake and in Sumner. And the food bank in Bonnie Lake is going to make sure that their staff is there to put all of the boxes and things together, to make sure it's stored properly, to order all of the supplies, etc. So you might have a memorandum of agreement that shows a clear delineation between which one of your organizations does what, and then how you're going to work together and how you're going to meet, etc. That might be a memorandum of agreement or understanding, right? And then understand the insurance requirements. So sometimes you are required, or a lot of times you're required to have insurance that covers the funder. What do we mean by that? So we're in healthcare, but we get a grant from the state to do youth violence work. And we require that all of our community-based organizations that are providing youth violence, who get this money that is passed through to us, that they include us as an additional insured. So if anything should happen, we are covered as being the entity that's providing the funding for that particular youth violence program. And that might be an expense for you all. So understand the insurance requirements. I know if you're working with a school district, sometimes in a school district will have $1 million aggregate funding that's available, just general liability. But some school districts require $2 million. That's maybe an additional cost. So understanding the insurance requirements. And then the documentation requirements. For example, if you get funding from the federal government, at a minimum, you're going to have to store all of your information regarding the grant for at least 6 years, sometimes 7. Do you have that ability, right? So understand the documentation requirements. Okay, Benji, give us some of your wisdom.
You betcha. So if you're in a bookstore and you have your favorite section, I would say you could go look for grant applications under science fiction. You are writing a science fiction book that says, if this happens and you give us $100,000 to do this project or make this change in the organization, then this change is going to happen in our organization and in the community. And so it's aspirational, right? It needs to be clear and it needs to be believable, but you're not going to be held to what you have in the application. The difference with contracting is if you're in Barnes & Noble, this is going to be a nonfiction, right? This is what you're going to be held accountable for. And so often between the application process and the contracting, there's a negotiation that you need to be proactive about with the funder, right? If you ask for $1 million and they give you 80,000, you cannot do the same amount of work, right? And so going back to them and saying, okay, well, here's the deliverables we can do. Here's how many people we can serve, giving the amount. Or, you know, we asked to do work in 3 communities. You were able to give us half the money. That means we can only do 1 community really thoroughly. But get to that level of specificity and don't overcommit. You want to over-deliver on your promises when it comes to the contract whenever possible. The other thing I'd say about contracting is that this is a relationship, right? And so things change. Funders know that things change. And sometimes you won't meet your goal because, you know, the economic depression happened, or some giant thing came up, or you just found that the strategy that you applied about wasn't working and you needed to change course. All of that is doable. It just requires communication with the contracting agent. Sometimes they'll push back on things. Sometimes they'll change the deliverables based on the new operating environment that you're working under, but it's all a conversation. So while I say it's kind of like the law, it really is kind of the law. You can change the law as you move forward, but it requires a lot of good communication and being proactive. You don't want to sit on things and just hope that the final report will pass muster. You want to really talk to people. Oh, the last thing I'd say about this is just One mistake I see new grant makers make a lot, grant writers make a lot, is that they have a million deliverables. My advice to you is come up with a few really solid deliverables. And Cynthia will talk about this later in the presentation, how to know that they're really solid deliverables. But the fewer you can do, the better it will be for tracking, and you won't spend as much time chasing money, basically.
Thank you, Benji. Wonderful advice. Thank you so much. I see there were a couple of questions in the chat, and I know you answered several of them. So thank you, Benji. Malcolm asks, is there a difference between an MOA and an MOU? Do you want to take that one, Benji?
Yeah, it's subtle, and I'm not sure I'm really an expert, to be honest. So the MOAs are a little bit tighter than MOUs in my own experience. So memorandums of understanding are like, we agree in principle, right? Memorandums of agreement are, we agree to do this thing based on agreeing in principle. So they're sometimes used interchangeably. Not everybody really uses that difference thoroughly, but I would say that MOAs tend to have more specificity and more sort of legally binding pieces than MOUs in general.
Thank you, Benji. And then the last one I see in here is from, I hope I'm saying this right, Celestine Jimenez. This is the first I've heard of insurance for a grant. Can you elaborate more on the types of insurance for a grant? Do you want to take that one, or do you want me to take it, Benji?
Why don't you take it now? I'm happy to chime in. If I have a feeling you've got this one covered.
Okay, so usually for funding, you have to have insurance for your organization, right? So general liability insurance, if something should happen. So let's say you're a food bank and you're out making deliveries and there's a car accident and your food truck was involved in that. Do you have general liability to cover that incident, right? If you're distributing food and the box falls, you know, the person delivering the box, it falls on the house in the yard of someone and it ruins their rose bed garden and they're upset about that. Do you have general liability insurance to cover those things? I mean, I'm being very, you know, small in my example, but you're required to have insurance. Just like you have insurance on your home, you would have insurance on your business activities. So there's general liability insurance. And then there might be special types of insurance that you might need. For example, if you're mental health services, et cetera, depending on the type of organization you have, there might be other additional insurance. I know school districts require what they call molestation and child abuse ones because, you know, you're working with a vulnerable population. And so they're requiring you to have insurance to cover if something should happen with any of your staff or anyone and a youth. That's not to say that it would, but you are required to have certain types of coverage because you're working with certain populations. So you will just want to look and see what that is. Yes, additional insured. Thank you. And that's the big one, is that the funders often ask for them to be an additional insured under the organization that's being funded under their general commercial liability insurance, right? And oftentimes, like for us, when I was an executive director of a small nonprofit, we were allowed to have up to 5 additional insureds at no additional cost. Then after that, it was like $100 for each one. So we tried not to go over more than 5 grants in a year because we knew we'd have to pay an extra $100 to have an additional insured. But that's just common. It just says that, you know, we as the grant, we as the funder are giving you money and you're going to cover us under the activities for which you're being funded for, as you're going to cover us as well under this in case anything should happen. So but you can look for those requirements, et cetera, in the notice of funding. Let's see. Okay, we're going to move on now. So I can't see it. So who to contact with questions? This is really, really important, right? Because this is about building a relationship with the funder. That's what this is about. So when a notice of funding available comes out, a NOFA or an RFP or a request for information, you want to look and see if there's going to be an information session. Sometimes they'll call it technical assistance that'll be available. Sometimes it's called a bidders conference for all the people who are going to submit a proposal for this fund source. Then they call those bidders, right? Or if you are doing a request for information or request for application, sometimes there are bidders, people who are coming in to submit a bid, submit a proposal or an application or information for that particular fund source. In there is always listed someone to contact with questions. And if there's information sessions or bidders conference, to sort of talk about questions and answers and to go over the main information regarding that fund source. You want to make sure you know when those dates are for those sessions and that someone from your organization is going, and that someone has briefed the person who is going to that meeting or to that information session. They have briefed them on some questions to ask. So in other words, you need to do your work and have read that general information about that particular fund source. You want to read through the entire thing and have some questions. Why? One, when you ask the question, you're letting people know I did my work. Two, you're letting people know, hey, I'm interested, and here's a little bit about my organization. And three, you're building a relationship. You're saying, look, here am I, see me, hello, what do they say? The squeaky wheel gets the oil. You need to squeak, 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 squeak. Get it out there, right? So it's an opportunity to ask questions for people to know who you are. And Benji.
Yeah, funders are not ATMs, right? You don't just send in the thing and punch in your pen and get the money. It really is a relationship business. And so thinking about asking questions, even if organizations don't require you to go to a webinar, I would still call the program officer if there's a foundation that I'm going to apply to, I haven't applied to before. I would still have a preliminary conversation. And most of those people want to help you create a proposal that's going to land well in the final decision-making process. They'll be honest with you if they think that you're not a good fit. And I would say, as hard as that is to hear sometimes, I would thank them for the feedback and ask them if they knew someone who might be a good fit for you, but let them off the hook at that point, because honestly, if they tell you you're not a good fit when you're at that phase, there's nothing you can do in the application to come back from that, honestly. They know their business best, so trust them. But I really would say think about this as a multi-step process where you're building a relationship with an organization. Sometimes it's more hard with like a big government entity if you're applying to the government. With private foundations, though, it's everybody. It's not just the Brad Cheney at the top of the food chain. It's the program officer who screens the grants, and it's the person that answers the phone when you call them, right? Everybody in the organization is really who you're building a relationship with. Oh, the other thing I would just say is on these technical assistance webinars and info sessions, learn from each other, right? One mistake I see from the funder side of this is people will ask the same thing over and over because they're not listening to each other in the meeting. And so it's an opportunity for peer learning, right?
Sorry about that. I lost my little menu that said I could unmute my little bar. Okay, thank you, Benji. And that part that Benji said about learning, that's also an opportunity to see who else is applying and what their proposals might be looking like, as well as opportunities for collaborations and partnerships. You might say, hey, I really like what that person is doing and saying, and that's in alignment with what we're doing in our community. I need to connect with them later, right? So look at that as an opportunity as well. Okay, grant process timeline. Let's just step back for a minute and let's look at what a general timeline might be for when there is a particular funding opportunity. So first of all, people who are in the grant funding business, there's a piece where we do discovery. that's where we're trying to say, is there a need out there and what can we do about it? Like data collection. So like for us, we know that maternal wellness is really an issue in the Black community, right? That we have higher rates of death and infant mortality in some of our Black communities than we do compared to the national average. And so we might do a discovery and say, hey, there's a need out there. Tell me more. Let me get more information. Like which community is that happening in? Which zip codes is that happening in? Where are there no hospitals? Where are there no doulas? Where is there no primary care physicians for pregnant moms? Let's do discovery, right? So in the discovery process, funders might send out information and ask for people to provide resources and data to help figure out what's the need and the extent of it. So you want to look for those types of announcements, because if you're in Bonnie Lake and you're the only game in town in Bonnie Lake, you are now the authoritarian on what food insecurity looks like in Bonnie Lake, because nobody else is doing that, right? So that's your discovery. Right? So you can submit information and say, well, let me just tell you, we've been in here for 15 years, and this is what our community looks like, and this is what the need is. Then there's the RFP creation. Sometimes once they get that information back, they'll say, okay, now we're going to create a funding process to address that particular need or needs. And so we're going to ask the community to come in and help us create what that funding guideline will look like and what that funding proposal is. So that's another opportunity for you to come in and participate in that process, right? So look for RFP creation opportunities. Then the RFP is issued. So once you've done the discovery, you've created the RFP, then you issue that funding proposal. Sometimes the RFP is by invitation. So you'll need to submit like a letter of intent that says, yes, I am interested in submitting a proposal for this. And here's kind of what our organization does and what we're thinking about for a proposal. And then the funder will look at it and say, yep, that's consistent with what we are looking for, or nope, that's not on the mark. So sometimes you have to submit an invitation or a little submit a survey to say, yes, this is what I'm interested in. And then if it's approved from there, then you're invited to submit a full proposal. And then other times an RFP is issued and it's just a straight proposal, or it's a straight application, or there's a portal where you have to do it online, right? Either way, those are some of the processes. And so that's another way to participate, right? Is to submit your information for that. Then there's the the RFP question and answers, or bidders conference, or information sessions, or an opportunity to meet with technical assistance providers, or an opportunity to just call and ask who are the contacts for that funding source, to be able to ask questions from this time period to this time period. So you want to be cognizant of that. That's usually another piece in the timeline, is where they have those information sessions where you can ask questions. And then there's the deadline for submission. And I always say you're late if you're submitting it on the day that it's due, right? You really want to submit it beforehand, because you never know what might happen. You never know. Wi-Fi might break down. We had an open RFP. We set it up, and then the Wi-Fi went out and the portal was down to submit grants. And so nobody was on time, even us, because we couldn't even accept it because there was no Wi-Fi to go online to submit it, right? You never know. So know what the deadline is. And then there's the review process. There's the first process on threshold. Do you meet the minimum requirements? If you do, then you're moved on to the scoring. And once the scoring is done and an initial award is made, right, then people are made aware of the award, and now an award announcement comes out. And then after the award announcement comes out and you all have agreed, for those that were awarded funding, that yes, we'll accept our award, then the contracting starts. And that's where you can start negotiating what your service deliverables are, and contract, all of the other parts of that contract. Okay, so that's the timeline, the process. Before I get to the grant writing plan, Benji, did you have any additional comments to add to that?
Just a quickie, which is that the time between the issuing the RFP and the deadline can be frustratingly, aggravatingly brief, right? The funders often, they know they have a meeting of the board coming up that they want to get applications in before that, or they know they have to spend the money that they gather as pass-through money from the federal government by a certain date. And so it's not unusual anymore to see 2 or 3 weeks as the amount of time between the announcement that funding is available and the time due, which basically means you need to have in your hip pocket some ideas at all times of projects that you're ready to go with, because starting from scratch at 2 or 3 weeks out is going to be really, really difficult.
Thank you, Benji. That is so true. So Jane put in the comments a question about, how do you locate an RFP? And we're going to talk about that towards the end. So hold that thought. But just think about this. If you don't already have a proposal ready, what you can do, though, is oftentimes go look at if this is a fund source that has been out before. You can go out and look at like who was funded last year and the year before and get an idea of the types of proposals that have successfully been awarded funding for that particular RFP, okay? And the types of organizations. So that's something else that you can do too. I mean, you're not trying to steal their idea, but you're getting a feel for what the funder is looking for and whether or not this is something that you can put together in and meet the deadline, the submission deadline. So that's something else to look at. Okay, there we go. So let's see if this works, folks. Technology. I'm going to click on this and supposedly it's going to take me to the application work plan. I just want to note something. Here it is, 11:25, and we are just now getting to the grant application work plan template. There is more to grant writing than just writing the grant. There's understanding the timeline, there's understanding the criteria, there's understanding whether or not your organization is consistent with the mission of that fund source, et cetera. There's all these things that you have to take into consideration before you get ready to write that grant. So now let's see if this works. Here we go. Technology. Yes, sir. All right, let me make this a little bit bigger for everyone. You will get a copy of this, but this is an application template. Let's see if I can move this over. So basically, it's just a chart, a template, a table with some specific information in it. So this template can be used pretty much and retrofitted, change it as needed for any type of grant writing that you're doing. So the first thing is you want to review the RFP. We already talked about that. Then you want to know what the information and sessions are in the bidders conference. You can put who it's assigned to. So let's say they have 2 open sessions coming up, one on January 25th and one on February 2nd. You can put the actual staff who are assigned to attend those. And you can put in here the questions that you want each staff to ask when they attend those sessions, right? The scoring criteria anticipated and all of that, you will get to as we go further down. But then you want to look at threshold eligibility, right? Who is that assigned to? Let's say Benji and I are applying for something. And I'm like, okay, Benji, you're looking at threshold eligibility and you need to do it by such and such date, right? And so that'll let us know, do we need to go any further? Or if we need to do work. For example, maybe we are a grassroots organization and we need to go find a fiduciary agent, right? Or maybe we don't have enough insurance and we need to up our insurance or something, right? Benji, do you have any additional information to add?
We talked about it earlier, but I would say there's a fine line between deluding yourself and asking questions when it comes to this sort of thing. So if you feel like we kind of sort of are eligible if you squint and look sideways and the phase of the moon is right. The chances are good you should not bother to applying. However, if there are legitimate questions about eligibility, like let's say your grassroots nonprofit does work in King County but your office is located in Pierce County, and the funder says they only fund for work in King County, it's worth a call to say, hey, we're located in Pierce, but 80% of the people we serve are in King. Can we apply? Right. So there are cases, but again, it's going to vary funder by funder. And I really encourage, if you clearly don't fit, just give yourself the pass on this one and go on to one that is a good fit for you all.
Thank you, Benji. Excellent advice. And then remember, we talked about a letter of intent or pre-application. So once you've determined, the RFP's out, you've reviewed it, you have people who are going to the information sessions, you know whether or not you've met the eligibility threshold. If a letter of intent or pre-application is required, you want to assign that to someone and make sure they do it, right? And that's, again, once you've determined that, yep, this is something we want to go for. And then don't forget to create an account in the grant application portal. So some organizations now that are providing funding actually use grant.gov or some other type of place where you have to go in and submit an application online, okay? Even if you are submitting a video and a testimonial as an application in lieu of doing all of the written application piece, you still have to create an application online with general information like the name of your organization, your tax ID, who to contact, your email, how long you've been in existence, that kind of thing. And then you are allowed to submit and upload the testimonial or the video. So don't forget to create an account. Do that early. Don't wait till the last minute, because you want to see what that portal looks like. You want to see how things are structured and what is required, right? And who needs to do what, because you may be only allowed access for an account for one person, but there might be a team of 5 who are doing this pieces of the application. Somebody may be doing the budget. Your accounting or treasurer may be doing the budget. You might have someone else who's just providing the general information and putting things in there like a copy of your 501c certification and what have you. So if you have different people doing it, but you're only allowed one account, you've got to figure out how do you work with getting those other people to submit information, right? Benji, do you have any other advice?
Yeah, just a couple of quickies. So we talked about letters of intent, and essentially those are very simple. You're saying we intend to apply. This is if there are multiple, different categories that they put in the RFQ, which category we're applying under. They're just trying to get a sense of how many applications to expect and manage the process. Pre-applications are different. Pre-applications can be pretty simple. It can be them saying, what are some of your ideas? And we'll tell you the ones that we think are the sexiest to our board at this time. Sometimes they're fairly simple that way. Sometimes in Pierce County, especially with some private foundations, the pre-application is essentially the same as the application form. The program officers are just wanting to see your responses to the question so that they can go back and tell you where you can be stronger, where your weaknesses are, and so forth and so on. So for a group like Cheney Foundation, for example, the pre-application is almost identical to the application itself. It's just them giving a way to really force the interaction between the program officer and you all to get as strong of applications as possible in front of their board. The other thing I would say on portals is that sometimes it takes days to set these up. So don't wait to the last minute, as Cynthia said. And the same is true on grants.gov, for example. When there are lots of people with the same application deadline date, the system can get really, really slow. And there are multiple steps and confirmations that you'll actually have to receive to know that they got your information on time. So I often say, start the submission process of uploading the documents and all that stuff at least a couple of days before the deadline proper, just so you can get through all those steps of the process and know that they have everything they need by the deadline date.
Thank you, Benji. Appreciate that. Okay, so now we're actually getting to the application. See, there's a lot to just getting to the application. So let's go back. General information, the cover sheet, right? You need to assign that to someone. This is just general information about your organization. You know, what's your organization, what's your address, what's your mission, what your core values are, etc. Right? And let me be clear, if they're asking questions about your mission, it's what Benji said, right? I grew up Southern Baptist too, Benji. If you ask what's my mission, I'm going to tell you, well, my mission is to drink as much coffee and eat as much chocolate as I want to, right? That's my mission. I'm very clear. What is my vision? What are my core values? If they ask for core values, don't just put integrity and equity and compassion. Define it. Integrity means doing the right thing when nobody else is looking. Now we're clear on what you mean by that definition, because what integrity means to me might be totally different than somebody else. So you want to be clear on those things. So on your general information cover sheet, you can actually list in here what those questions are, right? You can just do a little return, list those questions, and then who each one is assigned to, their response, right? And sometimes the general information sheet is not scored. So keep that in mind. If it is, though, you want to be able to put, here's the scoring criteria, here's the indicators, and what you think you're going to score based on what information you've put down. Okay. And then when that section is completed, check it off. It was completed by on such and such date. So you know that that piece is done. And then you can list the questions. Question number 1, what's your program need? Question number 2, how are you defining, where'd you get your data from? Question number 3, you can insert as many in here as you want. Just cut and paste your questions in here. And then who is that, again, assigned to which staff to do it? When those questions must be due, when the staff must complete them. And then they can put in those answers if you want to write in here. What's the criteria? What's the indicators? How is it being evaluated? And then later on, you can look and see as a team, here's what our response is. What do you think our score is? Did we meet those questions? And let's be clear, when they're asking questions, sometimes there's a part A and a part B. We are so good at it saying, okay, explain your program in detail. And then we put in parentheses, how many people you're going to serve, how often do you serve them, and the specific services that you provide. Is it Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday from 2 to 5? Or is it Thursday and Friday from 6 to 8 p.m., right? We are very specific. So we ask one question, but up under there is like a subset of 4 other questions. You want to be able to put that in here. So question 1 might be, who do you serve? And then we might ask the additional question. A might be numbers of people, number of clients, what's the what's the target population? I hate that word, but target population, etc. So you can list those things in here and make sure that you're addressing all of those questions. Okay. Let's see, what else do we have? All right, activities and reporting outcomes. This part, folks, is so important. So I want to introduce you to, if you don't already know, what we call results-based accountability. Results-based accountability, if you click on this, once you get it, it should take you there. Let's see if it'll work for me. It worked. All right, party. So this is results-based accountability. You can look on it, etc. Check it out. But basically, it asks it's about performance. And it asks three important questions. How much did we do? How well did we do? And is anyone better off because we did this? So how much did we do? How well did we do it? And did we impact the lives of the people we were trying to impact? Right? So then they list, a bunch of ways in which you can address those 3 areas. So that's something for you to look at in your own spare time. I'm going to go back now to this results-based accountability, the work plan. And so who did we serve? This might be your demographics information, age, city, race, ethnicity, right? Whether they were a veteran or not, right? This might be your demographics data. So who did we serve? How many people that met this many demographics? Now, how much did we do? So who was enrolled in your program? Who got the case management? How many food baskets were delivered? How many outreach events did you have? How many number of referrals? How many intakes did you do, right? Those are how much did we do? And then how well did we do it? This could be, I often say, give the percent and the number so that people can sort of see the extent to which you made an impact. So how many of those met their case management goals? How many of those were, or what percentage of those were actively engaged in the program, right? How many of those, that's how well we did. Now let's look at what was the impact of our program. Are our clients better off? So what's the number and the percentage of those who reported that they have increased self-confidence after completing the program, or that they no longer have, that they had 3 square meals instead of 1, that they didn't have to make a choice between housing, prescription, and food, that they were able to just concentrate on the food, right? That's the impact, right? So they weren't hungry while in your program. How many were housed for X number of days or number of months or a year? That's the impact that you've made. So again, results-based accountability, when you are looking at your outcomes and the activities, you want to make sure that your activities, the things that you're doing, if you're a food bank, if you're providing mental health, right, that there is some results related to those activities that you can look at. You can tell them how many you're serving, how much will you do, and the impact that your program will have. And those are the outcomes. The outcomes are the impact. Is your community better off because of the program activities that you're doing, right? And so here's some ways to think of that. When you do this, let's say you're a food bank and you do several things. Maybe you do an intake, like what's your need, right? Do you need more fruits and vegetables? Do you need more diabetic types of food, right? Are you have celiac disease and therefore you can't have any products with wheat or whatever? You've done the intake. So maybe that's one thing, is doing an intake and then tailoring the food box to meet your nutritious and dietary needs and your health needs. That might be the second activity. Then the third one might be, now we're delivering it to you. And then the fourth one is we're following up to make sure you're okay. So that's 4 activities, right? So you would list those. You're going to assign a staff to do it, the due date. You're going to have them put in how much, what you're proposing you're going to serve, the kind of data you're going to collect, right? How well you're going to be able to do this, and the impact that you're going to make on the lives of those folks. And again, like Benji said, keep it simple. You don't want to collect a whole bunch. Choose 1 or 2 under each area, call it a day, right? And then you could put in the scoring criteria information, etc., like we've done before. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Benji. Benji,
well, you hit RBA pretty well. Who's better off is really the key for me, and it should connect directly to your mission, right? If your mission is to serve a particular community, then the measure should speak to how this project directly makes steps toward that. I also encourage people not to think about others and how the outcome actually shows up in community. I think a lot of grant writers and a lot of us just think about how many times we've met, how many times, we did something. We had 12 meetings with people, this many people came. All of that's good information, but getting past that to really demonstrate what became of it is the key. And I think the more you can do that, the better. Because I end up reading a lot of grant applications and I end up thinking, well, they really made a case that they're the fastest racehorse in the competition, but it doesn't matter because they're running in the wrong direction, right? So you show the outcomes.
Perfect, thank you. And then Benji is putting some additional wisdom in the chat, so be sure to look at that. Thank you so much. You see why we call it Benji's wisdom? All right, the budget. Okay, folks, this is one where everybody sort of freaks out and you don't have to, right? Because in the budget, there's like some key principles. Number 1, look at what they are saying you can apply for. What are eligible expenses? Is it staff costs? Is it direct participant costs? Direct participant means, we're giving them direct assistance, whether it's the actual food box, whether it's the mental health counseling and therapy sessions, whether it's the housing deposit, right? Whether it's the case management, whether it's the relicensing efforts, right? Those are direct client support, paying for their transportation to and from things, providing child care assistance. Those are direct support, right? Okay, so make sure you understand the budget, the assumptions, put in information. For example, if you're doing salaries and benefits, the budget includes salary and benefits, then you want to put in the assumptions that you are or the information regarding the salaries. So for example, if you're asking for $100,000 in salaries, that might cover 3 positions. It might cover 2 program two program mentors at 0.5 FTE each. So you want to put that down. It's only covering half the salary of these 2 program folks. And then it might be 0.25 of the intake coordinator, right? And that accounts for, if you add up the 0.5 of those 2 program folks and the intake person, that gets you to your 100,000. And then under benefits, write it down. If your benefits, usually benefits is a calculation. So like right now we're using benefits of 28 to 29% of whatever the salary is. So if the salary for someone is 100,000 and we're using 28% of 100,000 is 28,000. That's what we're listing as the benefits. Sometimes in a grant, maybe you have a lot of different people that are being covered under the salaries piece. And so for benefits, instead of calculating the percentage for each, you just put one flat thing. You might say $50,000 for benefits, and you say, we're going to give each person $5,000 out of this 50 towards their benefits. So you don't have to do the calculation, but put the assumptions, the specific information for each budget line item so that it's clear. So here's the parts of a budget. There's salaries, right, and benefits. Then there's goods and services like office supplies, operating supplies, contracted service, auto expenses, printing, duplicating, insurance, rent for your building, rent for equipment. There might be miscellaneous like travel, training, indirect costs, and administrative costs. And note, for admin costs, there's usually capped at some percentage. But here you could list the budget line items, right? Who's responsible for doing it, making sure that what you are applying for is consistent with the mission and what you say, the activities you're doing, right? So you could score all of that. At the end, I would encourage you, at the end of this checklist, I would encourage you to upload the budget spreadsheet to this document so that you can look at it, and whoever's responsible can put in the information all in one spot, okay? But at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Benji.
Yeah, just a few things on budgets. So even though I'm a words person, I can tell you when it comes to applications, numbers tell a story as clearly as words. If you want to see what an organization cares about, just look at what it pays for, right? And so I really drill down on budgets when I'm a reviewer. Cynthia talked about the expense side of the budget quite a bit, but not really the income side of the budget. But it's a similar sort of situation where you might have earned income from fees that you charge or contracts with organizations for services or ticket sales. All of that could be earned income, contributed income, grants from other organizations, grants from individuals, special event income from the auction you had last week. All of that could be in contributed income. If you're lucky enough to have an endowment or something like that, that shows up here too. And then in-kind support is also shown on the income side of the budget. So if you're contributing something in kind toward the project, that it shows up on the expense side of the budget, you can demonstrate that above as part of your match for what you're asking for from the funder. Sometimes you'll be lucky enough in smaller organizations to have someone donate a service for you. Like when I was at the Broadway Center, we used to have somebody that always donated our audit services every year. So you could demonstrate that in income as long as that same expense is part of the project down below. It should be both above and below and always add up. The other thing I would say about budget is that there are exceptions to everything, but in general, most funders don't want to be the major funder of your organization or even of your project, right? So you want to think about demonstrating how other funds, how other pieces fit into this. And if it's a new project or a new service that you don't have a real track record for, I would suggest that you think about talking to people in private foundations and stuff as sort of a matching or a challenge grant kind of opportunity so that they'll be first, but then you're committing, we'll go out there and hustle and find somebody else so that you're not the only ones on the hook for this long term. And that'll go a long way with funders.
Thank you so much. I want to add to that. That is excellent and wonderful information. A couple of things is that for the in-kind, you can look for in-kind in a lot of ways. We provide interpreters, and translation of documents, right? That's a big expense for some organizations. So that's the in-kind, the value of that. Another one is we pay for duplicating and printing of documents. And so instead of going to, UPS or FedEx or somewhere like that, FedEx Kinko's, I guess they're called now, it might cost you $500 to get 30 bound booklets that you've got to provide information for your case management, where we could do it for $89. And we're just doing it in kind, right? So those things are really important. So Benji's absolutely right. Look for those in kind. And the other thing is when you have collaborations and partnerships, look at what you all bring to the table, because maybe your fiduciary agent has an accountant who will audit your books for you. That's an in-kind contribution. And yes, sometimes someone put in the chat, are there any caps? Yes, there are caps in some areas. But it's one thing to say you can only use half of your budget request for salaries. It's another thing to say, which we don't see, right, is that salary for this position is capped at. So what do I mean by that? Look, folks, just because we're in the nonprofit arena doesn't mean our folks don't know as much as those in the private sector and shouldn't be compensated. If a mental health licensed therapist is paid $80,000 in the private sector, then if you have a nonprofit with a mental health provider that has to have the same credentials and criteria as someone in the private sector, and you're paying them $80,000, then you need to put their salary in there. It's about time that we get paid and compensated for the work that we do. Now, I'm not saying you won't get funded for that, but what I'm saying is we deserve to be equal pay, equitable pay, right? Because the accountant that works for us in our nonprofit has to have the same information, or our CPA who does the audit for us every year, and our 990s for the IRS, right? And does our annual financial report to the Washington State Department, Secretary of State for our nonprofit, has the same amount of criteria as someone in the private sector. So you want to put that in and ask for it. Pay people for what they're worth. I'm just putting that out there. Benji, did you want to add?
Sorry, I've been typing away in the chat. I'm good.
Okay. All right. Okay. And so there's also usually in the RFP process, required documents. So your IRS letter that says, yes, you are a nonprofit, right? The IRS determination that says, yes, you're a 501c3. There might be a board resolution or requesting something that says your board was okay with you applying for this fund source, or maybe there's an org chart. These other required documents. You want to list what those required documents are, assign it to somebody who is within your organization who is supposed to get those documents, attach those documents to this form or a link to where they are so that those documents are ready to go when it's time to submit. So this whole work plan template for grants, you can attach all of your documents and the links to them. So this becomes how you collect your information. So when it comes time to put it in, you can just go right into the grants portal or right into the application and cut and paste because it's all right here. Benji, did you have any other things to add?
I just plopped it in the chat for the sake of
Okay.
time here.
All right. And so make sure you look at the application checklist, make sure that you have everything done, right? Make sure that the application is signed. And let's be clear what we mean. Sometimes they want a wet signature. Sometimes it's like DocuSign where you can do that. But make sure whoever signs it is the right person for that entity. If you have a fiduciary agent, it is whoever is who is the person authorized for that fiduciary agent to enter into contracting negotiations for that fiduciary agent on behalf of your grassroots effort, right? If it's your executive director, sign it. If it's your CFO who can only do it, make sure the appropriate person who has the ability to submit grants and has been authorized by your board, that they're the ones to sign it. And then you make sure your application is submitted. And then at the end here, you can put all your links to your required documents. You can attach the budget, etc. So you can put everything right here. So it's all in one place and everyone can have access to this who will be working on it, including your partners and collaborators from different organizations, right? So that you all can be working from the same document and see what you're doing. And ideally, you're looking at the criteria indicators, making sure that you have the anticipated correct score and you can check off when those items are completed. All right, Benji, we're at 11:53. Do you have any other final wonderful words?
I'm good. If we flip back to the PowerPoint, I think we can move into that section. I'll just get going on it because I kind of know what's there. So on the relationship with funders, we've really covered that. Reminder that these are people. You don't want to be combative. You want to build a relationship long term. Take a no as advice and don't burn a bridge. Know that you can go back to them next year and learn and do better. On getting the grants is just the beginning. You heard a bit about contracting and all that part of it, but I'd say things to build relationship with funders. It's old school, but send an immediate thank you when you get a notification of funding. That means a lot that you appreciate the fact that you're getting the funding. You can show appreciation and build trust by signing your paperwork promptly and returning it by the deadlines that they've asked you to do that. Many funders appreciate publicizing the work that they're doing in community, but if people say they want to be anonymous, never ever go against that. You know, if they want to stay anonymous, let them stay anonymous. Don't think you're doing them a favor by publicizing them. I would also invite the direct participation of funders whenever possible. So if they're funding your community festival, invite them to the festival. If they're funding your new youth violence shelter, invite them for a tour of the site. Let them give them tools to help them see it and feel it with you. Be sure you inform your grant makers of any changes in timing or cost or approach in the work that you've agreed to do together, and make any documentation personal, right? Like if they give you the opportunity to submit a video, please do. They'll often end up being shown at their fundraising lunch in front of all the hundreds of donors or in their annual report about the good work they're doing in community. It just helps you tell your story through them, basically. And then grow funding over time, right? Don't expect that you'll start at $1 million with a funder. Start at $100,000 if it's a giant funder and work your way up, or start at $10,000 with a private foundation and get up there to 150, 250 over time. So, you know, they already have relationships out there that they're going to want to meet first. And so, you know, that's what you got to deal with, is just knowing that it's a long-term game. So the other piece is around prospecting, and this is a huge subject area that could be a whole other workshop. But I would say, you know, research organizations or projects like yours to see who's already funding in this space. You know, I love it when I get letters and newsletters from nonprofits in town that I can see who's funding whom. So I know who's out there that's new that I may not know. That's a good way. I often do research as well online. There are some foundation directories that you all might know about, like the Foundation Center has a great online directory that's available. Puget Sound Grant Writers Association is a local trade association of grant writers that they'll do things like host roundtables with a bunch of funders that operate like speed dating. So they'll bring 10 funders in a room in SeaTac and sit you up on tables where 8 of you can meet with a funder really briefly for 5 minutes. That's kind of fun. And then all of the e-newsletters and trade association kind of newsletters that push out opportunities are all there. I'll actually send you the websites and the follow-up materials, Jane. But lots of resources, including Cynthia and I really want to say as we wind up our time, we want this to be the start of the conversation with you. We love hearing from you. So if you have follow-up questions, go ahead and send them to Marcy and Daniel. Send them